Tonight, Trump hits out at Zelenskyy again. America will not put up with this for much longer, he warns. The US president is angry that Zelenskyy said the end of the war is very, very far away, calling it the worst statement. We're expecting to hear from him on camera in the next few moments, and we'll bring you that to you live. The Ukrainian president's already been responding to the latest outburst, saying his country needs real peace as soon as possible. Back here, Keir Starmer's told MPs that Britain must lead from the front to help Ukraine and must win the peace. And we'll also be looking at the influence King Charles has had over the last few days and how the monarch's been deployed by the government. Well, we sent handwritten letters to invite Fraser and Rosie Duffield onto the show. I'm pleased to say they said yes. They'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday. I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, as Prime Minister, you have manifestos and plans and strategies, and then you also have events. And Friday's event, when President Zelenskyy met Donald Trump and JD Vance, was an event in the same way that an explosion is an event that then sends shockwaves around the world. Keir Starmer's helping to lead the European response. We saw that today in the House of Commons and at the weekend with his meetings with other leaders. But it's worth reflecting on just how quickly the government is scrambling. This was just 4 days ago.
It's a great honour to have Prime Minister Starmer in the Oval Office. It's a very special place, and he's a special man. And the United Kingdom is a wonderful country.
Mr. President, thank you for your hospitality. Thank you for your leadership. This has been a very good and very productive visit. And with your family roots in Scotland and your close bond with His Majesty the King, it's good to know that the United Kingdom has a true friend in the Oval Office.
Well, at that point, the Prime Minister was probably thinking, job well done, diplomatic tightrope successfully walked, now I can relax a bit. But then the very next day came this.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's backed you far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
Still just such an extraordinary watch. And then, the scrambling really started. How to show support for Ukraine, but not alienating America. Keir Starmer got on the phone to both leaders, and then over the weekend he hosted Zelenskyy at Downing Street and organised a meeting of European leaders in London.
As you heard from the cheers on the street outside, you have full backing across the United Kingdom. And we stand with you, with Ukraine, for as long as it may take.
I mean, once again, number 10 probably thought, job well done. Diplomatic tightrope successfully walked. But, the problem is, whatever Keir Starmer does, whatever agreements he makes or diplomacy he enacts, it's all at risk of being blown off course by another shockwave from the States. And the latest from Donald Trump came just a couple of hours ago. It was in response to this from President Zelenskyy.
An agreement to end the war is still very, very far away, and no one has started all these steps yet. The peace that we foresee in the future must be just, honest, and most importantly, sustainable.
About 2 hours ago came Donald Trump's reaction. He wrote, "This is the worst statement that could have been made by Zelenskyy, and America will not put up with it for much longer. It's what I was saying, this guy doesn't want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing." And Europe, in the meeting they had with Zelenskyy, stated flatly that they cannot do the job without the US. Probably not a great statement to have been made in terms of a show of strength against Russia. What are they thinking? Well, after that, it seems Keir Starmer, like the rest of Europe, is just going to be scrambling again. Let's take a moment and unpick what is happening. The latest, David Blevins, our US correspondent, joins us now. David.
Of showdown in the Oval Office on Friday, still continuing. Washington still reeling, it has to be said. The president not just clearly angry at President Zelenskyy right now, but also a bit frustrated, to say the least, with European leaders. He's suggesting that they sent the wrong signal to Vladimir Putin in that tweet. And also, within the last few minutes, he has posted again on his Truth Social platform that Europe has spent more money buying Russian oil and gas than they have spent on defending Ukraine by far. So that's clearly on his mind. But despite all of the bombast, I suppose, what we're seeing on camera, extraordinary as it was, what we're reading in those Truth Social posts, there is an intense diplomatic effort continuing behind the scenes here. The president will meet with his national security team this afternoon. We know that there is the possibility that they would suspend US military aid to Ukraine completely. That would be extraordinary, given what European leaders said about increasing support for Ukraine at the weekend. But we've also heard from his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, this morning, that they just want to hear that President Zelenskyy regrets what happened on Friday, is still committed to the minerals deal that hopefully would pave the way to a ceasefire, and that he's serious about negotiating the terms of that. We've also heard from Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, after his conversation on the phone with Foreign Secretary David Lammy, that they appreciate the efforts being made by the UK government, and that they too remain committed to trying to negotiate a ceasefire. So a lot of plates being spun right now, some of them in front of camera and many of them behind the scenes, Sophie.
Yeah, absolutely it is. So many plates being spun over where you are in the States, but also back here in Westminster as well. How do you think Donald Trump is going to handle the latest from the Prime Minister here in Britain?
Well, Donald Trump is a man who is dealing with a lot right now. We expect to hear from him in the next few minutes. He's making an investment announcement, a Taiwanese company investing $100 billion, we understand, over 4 years. But the big question is, will he reference tariffs, for example, because the deadline for imposing those 25% tariffs, he's threatened on Canada and Mexico and increasing the tariffs on China. That deadline passes at midnight. But we'll have to wait and see if he says anything more about Ukraine during that meeting. Certainly, he knows that Washington is reeling because Democrats are horrified by what they describe as Donald Trump's attack on the democracies of the world. Republicans, on the other hand, are rallying around their man. And it was all very clearly played out over the weekend in a protest, or counter demonstrations, in fact, in Vermont, where J.D. Vance, the vice president, was skiing, where some of the so-called MAGA supporters turned up to cheer how he and Donald Trump had behaved in the meeting with Zelenskyy. And on the other hand, we had some Americans turning up in protest, suggesting, in fact, one man going as far as to ask the vice president, how does it feel to be Putin's puppet? So that shows the level of polarization there is here. I'm not sure we expected the polarization we've been well aware of for quite some time now to extend as far as America's relationship with Moscow.
OK, thank you very much indeed. David Blevins there for us. Well, back here in Westminster, the Prime Minister has been reassuring MPs the US won't be withdrawing military support for Ukraine after that explosive row that we saw. So Keir Starmer has told the Commons America is vital in securing peace in Europe. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates.
Take that, give it a spin.
Give it a spin, yes.
Keir Starmer is seizing the moment to become a major cog in global affairs. Here, hosting apprentices from the defence industry, hours after hosting a major summit of European leaders. International plaudits yesterday for placing Britain at the forefront of the coalition aiming to secure peace in Ukraine.
And now we're going to give you a lot more work.
Yes.
I call the Prime Minister.
Today, his focus improving his standing at home.
Less than a week since I called on this House to show the courage of our predecessors, we see clearly before us the test of our times, a crossroads in our history.
As he spoke, President Trump was launching another tirade against President Zelenskyy, the Prime Minister walking a difficult tightrope.
I also welcome the President's continued commitment to that peace, which nobody in this House should doubt for a second is sincere.
The plan is to move quickly and, at this stage, without President Trump.
Together we agreed a clear strategy. that the United Kingdom, France and our allies will work closely with Ukraine on a plan to stop the fighting, which we will then discuss directly with the United States.
That plan will likely mean British boots on the ground in Ukraine. For the PM, it's a necessary show of strength.
So a strong peace, a just peace, a lasting peace, that has now to be our goal. It is vital, it is in our interests, and its pursuit, Britain will lead from the front. We must now win the peace.
Can we bedrock?
Agreement across the chamber.
There are, of course, many areas where the Prime Minister and I disagree, but now is the time for us to discuss where we do agree. At times like these, it is so important that we stand together to defend shared values and the fundamental, basic principle that aggressors should not win.
There were occasional criticisms, some on his own side not happy about cutting foreign aid to fund defence spending.
Does the Prime Minister understand the concern of so many that these cuts could, in fact, in the long term, hobble the very leadership that the Prime Minister has shown this weekend?
The PM's new man in Washington already under fire too for suggesting Ukraine lays down its arms at once.
Speaker, many of us were confused by Lord Mandelson's comments yesterday. So can the Prime Minister confirm that they do not represent government policy?
The Prime Minister swerved the challenges and was mostly able to enjoy that rare common scene, unity.
I find myself in the strange and rather uncomfortable position of very much agreeing with the Prime Minister on everything he has said today.
It's been good to have him agreeing with me. We should do this more often.
The Commons united behind the Prime Minister today, just as problems started to emerge. Keir Starmer told MPs that he needs more from the US to guarantee Ukraine's security than a minerals deal alone. Meanwhile, President Trump launched a blistering attack against President Zelenskyy. He's leading the European response, but it feels like a race against time before the White House could pull the plug. President Trump's closest ally in Parliament thinks Friday's White House row actually leaves peace closer than ever.
Zelenskyy needed to wake up and smell the coffee. And since that meeting, he's done so. But the upshot of it is the minerals agreement will be signed within the next week or 2 weeks. And that'll be the first step towards a ceasefire and a peace agreement. I absolutely agree. We've got to work out what those security guarantees for Ukraine look like.
A ceasefire within days has been floated by the French. Pressure is mounting from America. Can the Prime Minister keep everyone on board? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, Sam joins us now. Sam, I feel at the minute like I don't know what's happening from one hour to the next, so I apologise in advance for this question, but what do you think comes next?
I suppose it's too glib to say that nobody knows, even though it feels a little bit like that's the tempting art at the moment, not least because diplomacy really is the triumph of turning hope into reality. And I do know what people hope might happen next, Sophie. There are lots of ideas swirling around in that film. I mentioned the French idea about a ceasefire within days. Now, in the last half an hour, I've been in contact with British officials, and they tell me what they want to happen before any such ceasefire, which clearly is being discussed, is that deal on minerals. Actually, Nigel Farage had it right. In the next few days, the kind of optimistic case at the moment is that Zelenskyy and Trump sign that deal and then they move ahead from there. Now, that in itself presents all sorts of obvious difficulties. They need to be in agreement. Does that mean that Zelenskyy needs to offer up some kind of apology, show a bit more contrition that he did with our colleague Yalda Hakim on Sky last night, or in that overnight address that seems to have fired up Donald Trump once more on social media this evening? Those sorts of things are at the heart of what's going on. But clearly Britain thinks that that is still a viable plan and that there is a chance that that could happen. The fact that then there could be a ceasefire shows just how far we have travelled, because you only have to go back a few months and Keir Starmer was saying that the outcome of this whole conflict had to be Russia defeated, the certainly post-2022 gains in territory from Russia pushed back and handed back to Ukraine. Now we're just talking about freezing the conflict and working out what happens next. So many things difficult for Ukraine. You can see why President Zelenskyy might not be completely happy to go along with the plan that certainly some European nations, including us, look like they're pushing him down at the moment.
Yeah, you really can. Like you say, it just feels like we've just moved so quickly on this subject, doesn't it? Sam, thank you very much. Sam Coates there, a Deputy Political Editor. Well, let's get a little bit more on this story, because joining us now is Professor Paul Moorcraft, who's the Director at the Centre for Foreign Policy Analysis, a visiting professor at Cardiff University as well. Great to have you on the programme. We've had the latest blast from Donald Trump against Zelenskyy. We, of course, have seen those scenes on Friday as well when the two men met. Do you think there is any way where we get some kind of deal over the line on minerals and then a US security guarantee, or is that really for the birds?
There's a way out of this. I'm afraid Zelenskyy, who I admire, I spent time in Ukraine, I've written a book about him. He's a man I admire. He has to go because Trump clearly cannot stand him, and it's been emphasized today. And Trump is a man who's transactional. He likes to have a win. So as a constitutional solution within Ukraine, the chairman of the parliament, Chairman Stefanchuk, can actually take his place. He offered to resign just 2 weeks ago before this kerfuffle. So Zelenskyy goes, and the chairman of parliament goes to Washington because Trump has said he wants the deal signed within 48 hours. He goes over to Washington, he signs the deal, and that's the beginning of progress, because the way that Zelenskyy has been treated in London, a very popular man, but that's seen by Trump as an affront. It's a rebuke to Trump. Now, we have to understand Trump. He's the most powerful man in the world for the next 4 years, and his vice president will probably take over another 4 years. And so we have to have an American involvement as a deterrent. All this chest beating in London and saying we're going to do this, that, and this, and we have nuclear weapons. So there is a solution. I hate to say this, and I've been all across social media, I've been attacked for being a William Joyce or Lord Hoare or Neville Chamberlain. I just want the war to end. And unfortunately, just as Churchill gave way to somebody else after being victorious in the Second World War, Zelensky's not victorious. He's losing the war. Trump can't stand him. We've got to do some kind of deal.
There's an awful lot to unpick there. But just on the point about Zelenskyy having to go because Donald Trump doesn't like him, I mean, I know that Donald Trump says that he's a dictator, but he was elected. It's a democratic country. Don't you think there's something pretty off, pretty undemocratic about the US being able to choose who is leading Ukraine?
It's all very unpleasant. I mean, Trump, in my view, is a very unpleasant man, but he's thin-skinned. He's an old man in a hurry. He wants to get the peace deal done. Whether thinks he's going to get the Nobel Peace Prize, I don't know. But it was clear that Zelenskyy misread the room. He didn't wear a suit. I know he never does, but he could have done that for respect to Trump. He should have spoken in, Ukrainian, because if you have a translation, it stops the talking over business. It might have saved the actual arguments. And Zelenskyy had been briefed carefully what he had to do. He had to play up just for a couple of, an hour to Trump's sensitivities. He didn't do it. Now he has to step down for the sake of the country he loves. He got it wrong. No matter how bullying Trump is, he is necessary to deter the Russians and to do the deal.
I mean, at the same time, you said there that Winston Churchill gave way. He lost the general election in 1945. So Britain booted him out, which is very different, isn't it? It's still Britain choosing their future. I mean, I just guess that going back to Ukraine surely needs to be able to choose their leader.
In the future, yes, but because of martial law, just as in the Second World War, there were no elections. That's why I suggested the constitutional.
Well, Churchill lost an election. There was an election in 1945, and Donald Trump criticised him of criticised Zelenskyy for being a dictator, and now people are talking about how he hasn't got to go. It feels a bit sort of double standards, doesn't it?
I'm talking of you now, but at least I'm wearing a suit. the difference is that Zelensky is, he was elected fair and square. He can't hold elections because of the war. Everybody agrees with that. But there can be a constitutional solution. As I said, the chair of the parliament can replace him constitutionally, go over and sign this thing. Because, look, we had the same problem. The Americans have always been transactional. We were completely screwed when our backs were against the wall, when we had war loans from America, which were not paid back till 2006. So American behavior is not completely unusual. There's a pattern. At the moment, one man is stopping forward progress of hopefully ending the war. Much as I admire Zelensky, he has to go.
OK, thank you very much indeed. It's been really interesting to talk to you and get your perspective this evening. Thank you. Well, we are eyes on the White House. We're waiting to hear the latest from Donald Trump. But in the meantime, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The political commentator and Times columnist, Fraser Nelson, and the independent MP, Rosie Duffield. It's great to have you both on today. Fraser, I'm interested to get your take on all this, because it feels like so much has moved in the last 4 days or so. There's been praise for Keir Starmer in the House of Commons, but do you see a way forward in all of this?
Well, certainly Keir Starmer has had his most impressive week since becoming Prime Minister. I've never been more impressed with him personally, even in the last few days, especially when you juxtapose it to the kind of chaos that we see in the States. I mean, he's not a natural foreign policy expert, Keir Starmer, but it comes to him very easily. It seems to come to him more easily than domestic policy, perhaps. But right now, he's playing a blinder. But this idea of Zelensky going, I think, is really important to unpack, because Trump's saying it, Professor Moorcraft was saying it there. Now, of course, as you say, first of all, Ukraine is a democracy. It chooses its own president. But they had an opinion poll the other day showing that Zelensky is way, way ahead if there is an election tomorrow. The only person who comes close to him, about half his support, is Zelenskyy, the former head of the army. He's even more hardcore than Zelensky. And behind him, on 10%, Poroshenko, who is Zelensky's predecessor. Now, Poroshenko, his party are the only ones criticising Zelensky for messing it up. But they are notorious in Ukraine for having signed the Minsk agreements, which led to the disaster last time around. So if there were to be an election in Ukraine tomorrow, then Zelensky would do very well. And even his putative rivals have recently been posting praise of him. Zelensky has been posting a picture of him together with Zelensky, saying, look, we need to come together right now. Ukrainians' collective backs are up by all this. And the idea that there's somebody waiting in the wings, that there's a kind of Michael Heseltine figure they can just parachute there because the White House wants to refresh, is just a fantasy. Ukrainians are not going to be fighting for their democracy only to have America tell them who should be the president.
It really does feel like that, doesn't it? And like you say, that opinion poll was really striking at a time when Donald Trump's been trying to say that, look, his approval ratings are, 4%, I think he said.
Yeah, 44%.
Yeah, exactly. Missed the 4 at the beginning. Rosie, do you agree with Fraser that this has been Keir Starmer at its most impressive?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not known for being a fan of Keir Starmer, but it's been, it's sort of almost what he needed, ironically, and I'm sure he didn't want this to happen now, but it has given him a boost, and he does look good on the world stage. And also it has united the House. We were all sort of sniping at each other. He's had some tremendous problems internally in the Labour Party, and this has just sort of poured oil on that, and we can all sort of unite and agree. But I agree totally with Fraser about the whole idea of replacing Zelensky. I'm seeing some of my Ukrainian community at the weekend and just thinking of what they've all been through. The last thing they need is even more instability, I think, in their own country. They're looking at Zelensky. He's been a hero to them, and they need him to just carry on being tough and facing down what essentially is these toddler tantrums of Trump's.
Do you think that there is a way where Europe can provide the security that Ukraine needs if America doesn't step up, Fraser?
I don't, but I see why Europe's offering that right now. I mean, when you look at what Britain would probably need to send a division, about 9 battalions over there. We don't have the forces. We don't have anything like the 20,000 troops to deploy over there that you would need for serious peacekeeping. Zelensky himself has said that if the Brits basically send the minesweepers and the Navy and give them the kit, then he'll be able to do the rest. But it's important right now to make the offer to basically give Zelensky leverage. What we're seeing now is Trump trying to diminish Zelensky, to browbeat him, to say, you don't want peace, I can't do deal with you, because he knows that there can be no agreement without Zelensky's say-so. So he wants to do everything he can to diminish and bully and batter Zelenskyy. And that's why it's so important that Europe rallies behind him and says, look, even if America walks away, we, your European allies, will stand by you. If you want to fight a guerrilla campaign, we will back you as much as we're able to. Because if that happens, then Trump loses his veto. He thinks he can pick up the phone to Moscow and decide it between them. He can't do that if Ukraine still wants to fight. So right now, the only thing, the most helpful thing Europe can do is to give its full square support to Zelenskyy today, and then worry tomorrow about the practicalities. But right now, you absolutely have to strengthen Zelenskyy's hand as much as you can. Otherwise, he was admitting only yesterday that Trump wanted him to give away Crimea forever. I mean, not say it's a frozen conflict, say, I accept that this is Russian. That comment Trump hated today when he was saying the war is a long way from being over. That's because as far as Ukraine is concerned, the war might be adjourned while they do partition the country. But in the same way that South Korea still hasn't given up claim of the North, you know, they will never accept that the war is over until the country has been reunited.
I saw you nodding a bit there. What about the sort of defence commitment? Are you comfortable with what Starmer said?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are internal battles about the cutting of international aid, and that's not going away. But for now, I think it's paused. Barry Gardiner and Emily Thornberry raised it today, and that is a big issue bubbling up in the Labour Party. And I think it is worrying on a sort of larger scale. Who are we allowing to fill those gaps if we're not, you know, from a sort of tactical point of view, who's going to fill those gaps if we're not supplying international aid? Is China and Russia, you know, are they going to move into that space and make those allyships? So that's really frightening as well.
Thanks both very much. We'll have more from you throughout the programme. We are, of course, expecting to hear from the US President shortly. We understand he'll announce a Taiwan chip firm will be investing £100 billion to the US, but we are also expecting Ukraine to come up as a topic as well, and we will go to that shortly. But in the meantime, joining us now from Kyiv is Ukrainian MP Andrii Osadchuk. Thank you very much for being with us. Our previous guest just said that President Zelenskyy needs to resign, to stand down in order for peace to happen in Ukraine. How do you think that would go down?
Look, first of all, thank you for having me here. Secondly, I am opposition members of parliament for you to understand my logic that I never was a supporter of Zelenskyy during all his 5.5 years in the office. But Zelenskyy represents the interests of Ukrainian people, and he was elected in fully legitimate and democratic elections. And I think it's very wrong understanding of Zelenskyy that someone may say that he is doing something on his behalf. Based on his previous career, he feels very well the crowd, the people. And in fact, for the last 3 years, he's doing exactly what Ukrainian people wants. So that's why it's absolutely ridiculous to think that any pressure on Zelenskyy or illegal replacement of Zelenskyy may change the will of Ukrainian people. Secondly, the very dangerous rhetoric that people in the United States and some people in Europe start repeating Russian propaganda talking points. It is Putin who started this discussion, I think, in the middle of last year. I just want to remind you all that invasions were started in 24th of February 2022 with one fundamental target: to replace Ukrainian leadership as president, as parliament. And the plan of Vladimir Putin was to do that in 1 week or in 3 weeks as maximum. But finally, he stuck in Ukraine for 3 years. He lost hundreds of thousands of people. We destroyed almost 50% of Russian army, meaning that he can do nothing with Ukraine. He can do nothing with Ukrainian political leadership. And now, using all his KGB techniques, he's trying to influence on us through outside. Said that, I don't see any chance for Zelenskyy to step down. In addition to that, I really would be very much appreciate any elections in Ukraine. I would like to see new election to the parliament, new election of the president of Ukraine. But elections is not just the word. It's a very complex democratic process. And when we have 1 million people in army, 7 million internally displaced persons, not less than 5 million of adults in Europe, and daily attacks of Russian Federation. Yes, now maybe someone may think that it is routine, but Kyiv under daily, or correctly said, every night attack of Russian kamikaze drones. So it is physically just impossible to conduct any election. So that's why in Ukraine we have a consensus, despite of political parties and political groups, that for the moment it is impossible to conduct elections, and Zelenskyy shall serve as the leader of the country till the end of the war.
You speak really powerfully, and actually I would actually like to say that I'm sorry that you've even got to respond, frankly, to some of the disinformation that we have been hearing over the last week or so. If the US support doesn't come, do you believe Europe can provide what Ukraine needs?
First of all, the drama of the last 3 years that European leaders, they were coming to Kyiv pretty often. I have heard dozens and dozens excellent speeches in Ukrainian parliament on Ukrainian support, but it does not seem that Europe was waked up during all these years, thinking that all this drama shall finish somehow. And even before Trump came into office, it was understood that support from US is under the risk. And unfortunately, everyone was waiting, in fact, till the Munich conference to understand that something wrong. Because in fact, only after Munich conference, President Macron started to organize urgent summits. And we were witnessing yesterday a very important meeting in London. I think all that is very good. All that is a little bit late, but for sure, European Union and United Kingdom has enough of resources to continue to support Ukraine and to continue to strengthen the safety and security of European continent. I think it's very important to rebuild the relations with Trump administration, despite all their strange behavior and strange way of doing things. Because as yesterday, European leaders in London confirmed that despite all the efforts from European Union for today, the safety guarantees is possible only with involvement of the United States. So said that, I think it's good that Europe finally is trying to consolidate. And again, it's not about Ukraine, it's about future of Europe and safety and security of European continent. But yes, we all need to rebuild the contacts with the Trump administration because otherwise it will be very, very tough to continue all the warfare in Ukraine. And the last comment, till today, I think no one have ever heard any signs from Moscow that they want any ceasefire. So that's why we shall not speculate on that, and we shall be focused only on strengthening of Ukraine and continue support to Ukrainian military to conduct operations on protecting of Ukrainian lands.
Okay, thank you so much. You've made your point very strongly on the programme this evening. It's been great to have you here. Well, we are awaiting, of course, an announcement from Donald Trump, the US president. We believe it's on investments, but you never know with these things. Donald Trump is a freewheeling president, so we'll have to wait and see exactly what he is going to say. We're expecting some questions as well, so no doubt it's going to be lively. When he does appear in front of that podium, we'll bring it to you live. In the meantime, we can chat again to Fraser and Rosie. I mean, it was very powerful, wasn't it? I have to say, you know, listening to the Ukrainian MP, not a fan of Zelenskyy, he's an opposition MP, but still saying, like, actually, he has got the backing of Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's obvious when you know, all MPs will speak to their constituents who've found a new home in the UK, and they all are just, you know, this is a trauma situation for them. 3 years, the last thing they need is this upheaval, and, you know, someone else dictating who's there democratically elected. It's a crass thing to say.
I think it's so important to hear the voice of Ukrainian opposition because, as you say, the misinformation narrative is that Zelenskyy is unpopular, that he's hiding from the electorate, that he's suspending election because he's worried he's going to get booted out. In fact, you know, as we've heard there, even the opposition are saying that he's got their full backing right now. Until the conflict is over, they're not calling for elections. They know that half of the country is occupied. Lots of people are in exile. Lots of people are at the front. It's very difficult to hold an election in these situations. And it's only a controversy, really, in parts of the MAGA right, where they're wanting to make out, they're wanting to suggest, and this has become a big touchstone point for certain aspects of the right, that Zelenskyy seems to trigger them in the same way that Israel triggers some in the left. And it's become a very strange wavelength thing, which perhaps explains why J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are talking in the way they do, it's a message to their base. Because Joe Biden revered Zelenskyy so much, as does much of Europe, it's almost as if for that reason they want to trash him.
It's quite interesting,
Oppositional
actually.
defiance, isn't it, for the sake of it?
Yeah, I was also quite struck where, in the interview, the MP did say that the relationship with America should be rebuilt, or at least Ukraine needs to try to rebuild that relationship. I saw your reaction.
Zelensky's doing so well. I think quite a lot of us would struggle to be as diplomatic and as sort of polite as he has been, given what he went through on the world, you know, in front of the entire world on Friday.
Are you happy with the state visit that Donald Trump's been given by Keir Starmer?
I would rather it didn't happen. And I think, you know, the King having welcomed other people in this weekend, I think was a really good sign. Obviously, he's a brilliant diplomat. It's been passed down through the generations in that family, hasn't it? And thank goodness we've got that. I know that lots of people who argue against the monarchy are on my side of politics usually, but come on, we need them at the moment, and they're doing a brilliant job.
You don't have to be a fan of Donald Trump to think it's good that Britain has some leverage there. Absolutely. I think right now we can see Keir Starmer really using his Brexit powers, ironically, to have an independent trade policy, independent AI policy, independent diplomatic policy, positioning himself as the man who, after that disastrous press conference, called Trump, called Zelenskyy, tried to put the two together. Britain's role as a kind of mediator here, I think, is really valuable. And having Donald Trump, you can just see he's a monarchist, Donald Trump. He loves the royal family. It goes to show the incredible convening power of the royal family to get an unprecedented second state visit, and he's pretty much eating out of Starmer's hand. So I think most people realise that having the great orange president descend with the flying circus that he always brings might not be to their tastes, but it's far better. Britain's got that leverage, then we don't.
OK, really interesting to hear from both of you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, the latest on Ukraine is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the political journalist Zoe Grunewald and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. We're, of course, still awaiting to hear from Donald Trump, the man we've been discussing an awful lot on the programme this evening, as soon as he steps in front of that podium to make an investment announcement. But, of course, these things tend to be quite freewheeling. We will bring it to you live. Well, as we've been discussing, the dust was settling on a diplomatic whirlwind for Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and one person who knows this more than anyone else is our lead world presenter, Yalda Hakim. Yalda, you, of course, spoke to President Zelenskyy yesterday. You met with him. He's faced this latest diatribe from Donald Trump this evening. What are your reflections after meeting the Ukrainian president?
You know, Sophie, it was quite extraordinary, actually, because I wasn't sure if I was going to be confronted by a man who was incredibly rattled by the experience just 48 hours earlier, where he was virtually ejected from the Oval Office. But he, you know, a select group of journalists were asked to go to Stansted Airport after he'd had this big day at Lancaster House and then meeting the King. So he arrived with his bodyguards and his team, and he was in good spirits. He walked in, he apologised for being a minute late. And then he sat down, and I was right beside him, and I observed him for an hour and a half. And he was very firm, he was defiant. You know, he was just very certain of his position. He was asked a number of times in the room to apologise, or whether he would apologise, and he just wouldn't budge. And, you know, he was asked about the sort of the drama of the day. He wouldn't get drawn into it. And his position just did not change. I asked him whether there had been any contact from the administration. And he said to me, no one has contacted me from the administration, not at my level. He said, let's just have a listen to that exchange.
There is communication, but not on my level. Yes, in regard to my resignation, if I am to be changed, and I'll hear what's happening with the support to change me, it will not be easy, because it is not enough to simply hold elections. You would need to prevent me from participating in the elections, and it will be a bit more difficult.
Big day.
Well, let's cross now to the White House, where Donald Trump is speaking.
This gentleman is a very unique man. It's, I think I could say in the world of chips, certainly, but in the world pretty much of business, nobody's done what he's done. For those of you that are into that world, you would say, wow, he's a legend, but he is a legend, and it's an honor to be with you. Very great honor. Thank you very much.
Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Welcoming from TSMC, which is the biggest there is at a level that you can't even calculate, frankly. CC Wei to the White House for a very historic announcement. This is a tremendous thing for our country and hopefully for his company. We're also pleased to be joined by Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and White House AI and the crypto czar David Sachs, another two very highly respected people. It's great to have you guys involved. And David, thank you very much for coming on. David is sort of the king of intellect in that world. We have some good people. Today, Taiwan Semiconductor is announcing that they will be investing at least $100 billion in new capital in the United States over the next short period of time to build state-of-the-art semiconductor manufacturing facilities. I think mostly it's going to be in Arizona, which is what I understand, which is a great state. I like it because I won it, but I won most of them, actually. But we won it, and we won it big. The most powerful AI chips in the world will be made right here in America, and it'll be a big percentage of the chips made by his company. But as you know, they're based mostly in Taiwan, and they're far and away the biggest. There's nobody even close. This $100 billion in new investment will go into building 5 cutting-edge fabrication facilities in the great state that we just discussed, Arizona, and will create thousands of jobs, many thousands of jobs, and they're high-paying jobs. In total, today's announcement brings Taiwan Semiconductor investments to about $165 billion they've started already. Among the largest new foreign direct investments in the United States, Apple, as you know, made a big announcement last week of $500 billion, and we have some others that have announced. We have many that want to announce, but I don't have time to do all of these announcements, I tell you. But for you, I'm doing the announcement.
Thank you.
This will create hundreds of billions of dollars in economic activity and boost America's dominance in artificial intelligence and beyond. Semiconductors are the backbone of the 21st century economy, and really, without the semiconductors, there is no economy, powering everything from AI to automobiles to advanced manufacturing. And we must be able to build the chips and semiconductors that we need right here in American factories with American skill and American labor. And that's exactly what we're doing. As you know, Taiwan pretty much has a monopoly on that market. And I think pretty much is not a term that's even appropriate. They do have a monopoly. And this is a tremendous move by the most powerful company in the world. It's a matter of economic security. It's also a matter of national security for us. And at the same time, Mr. Wei will be able to diversify and have his a tremendous presence in another place, and a very safe place. And I want to thank Taiwan Semiconductor for doing the announcement. And I'd like to ask Mr. Wei to say a few words, if you might. And I'd also like to ask Howard and David, you can say a couple of words, but maybe you should go first, because right now he's the most important man in the room. I'm sorry, fellas. Please. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great honor.
Mr. President.
Thank you.
I'm a little bit nervous, so I have to pull out my piece of paper. Mr. President, Secretary Lutnick, and David, I didn't know that your title, but okay. First, I want to say thank you to Mr. President to give me this opportunity to announce our big project in the U.S. TSMC is the world's largest chip manufacturing, funded by Dr. Morris Chang in 1987. It's now at the forefront of semiconductor technology, supporting AI advancement and industry growth. In fact, I would like to wind back the time that in 2020, we have to thank President Trump's vision and his support. So TSMC start the journey of establishing the advanced chip manufacturing in Arizona. And now, let me proudly say, now the vision become reality. In Phoenix, Arizona, with 3,000 employees, we are producing the most advanced chip made on U.S. soil. With the success of our first fab, so we are now very happy to announce we are going to invest additional 100 billion US dollar in addition to our current 65 billion US dollars investment in Arizona. We are going to build 3 more new fabs after we promised 3 fabs already, and another 2 very advanced packaging fab, and most important, R&D center also in Arizona.
Well, we'll still keep an ear across this for you, but it is just worth reflecting with our panel with Fraser, Nelson and Rosie Duffield about what all this means. Fraser, I was just kind of reflecting how, we're talking an awful lot about Russia, about Ukraine, but Donald Trump really has his eye on China as well, doesn't he? Absolutely.
And of course, Taiwan is so important, not only because it's an ally of America, but because it produces 90% of these chips, which America needs. It's incredibly difficult to make a chip-making factory, so that's why Taiwan's got this grip. And for a long time, Americans have been desperate to get them going in Arizona, paying billions of dollars for them to come over. But they're worried, of course, if China were to invade Taiwan, that would put a chokehold on America's AI industry. So they see this as a matter of strategic alliance almost, where they want to get their own chips and they want to get it done as soon as possible. But you can also see Taiwan being a bit nervous, looking at this, thinking, hang on a minute, America was supposed to be defending Ukraine, now it's abandoned it. So if Trump does divide the world, like I'll take America, Putin can take Europe, and maybe Xi can take China, we can see a world where America isn't as concerned about Taiwan's independence. So the Taiwanese will be looking with as much horror as everybody else at the way that press conference ended last week and thinking today it's Ukraine, tomorrow it might be us.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, actually. It's almost like the kind of strong men, the like superpowers of the world that Donald Trump perhaps, has a bit more respect for, leave them alone, let them get on with it. I mean, is this more evidence of, Donald Trump, the businessman? Is that the lens through which we
He's reminding us, isn't he? There he is sort of having a tantrum live on television on Friday, and he's reminding us of just exactly how powerful he can be. This is a huge deal, and it's another message to the world, don't mess with me, I'm in charge, I'm pulling all the punches. That's what he wants us to feel about him. And it's hard to kind of think how we can get around that. And, it's quite frightening, I think, personally.
Talking about Donald Trump, the businessman, I was thinking about the kind of minerals deal with Ukraine as well. Fraser, I don't know if you could kind of unpick it a little bit for us. How important do you think that is? The financial aspect of it?
Well, financially, it will help them. But I think the big disagreement is Donald Trump thinks that if there are Americans there pulling minerals out of the ground, then that is itself a security guarantee. Because no way would Putin dare invade if there's enough Americans doing enough business there. But then again, there were Americans in eastern Ukraine when Russia invaded last time. They just up sticks and left. There are American companies. McDonald's is being bombed only today by Russia. So I'm not quite sure. The Ukrainians don't see it as a guarantee at all. Although Trump was saying, look, if my contractors are out there, you don't need my army because nobody would mess with me. So it's not, after Iraq, America did the same sort of thing. It had lots of contracts to rebuild Iraq, and they thought there'd be some great, it didn't work out that way. But it's not unprecedented for America to have contracts coming after diplomatic help. I think Zelenskyy is quite happy with this. I think it's a nice problem to have. If if Ukraine becomes the kind of South Korea of Eastern Europe, then that's a good model for them. But there's lots of debate going on right now as to just whether that is in any way a proxy for proper security guarantees.
I get the sense that you're, just fuming.
Yeah, look, they have to have those security guarantees. It's exactly as Fraser said, the Americans can just go off on a whim, and look at him, he's all over the place. If he has another tantrum, he could pull out. They're not safe. They need those guarantees, don't they?
Do you think that Europe could provide those guarantees in the
We're
absence
on the
of
opposite sides of the Brexit fence, and yes, you're seeing that, at the moment Starmer's doing a really good job with Europe, but actually it's on the whim of all of those leaders, and things are changing all of the time in Europe. We need that strength that we didn't have. Only Brexit can provide that for us as part of that. There's a defence meeting coming up that we're not at the table for example. And, I think it's a great opportunity to start talking about that closer relationship again.
Donald Trump, I think, has started talking again. They're still talking about semiconductors, but as I said, if he does mention anything on Ukraine, Zelenskyy, then we will hop back on it. Fraser, I saw you were about to say something then, sorry.
Well, just that Europe could provide Ukraine's defence. Before that, we would need to spend just so much more in defence, not just Britain, but Germany and France. And the Germans are today thinking, OK, maybe we can bend the borrowing rules and try to spend more in defence that way. But that would come up with the buffers of the German parliament that might not let it happen. Keir Starmer's got a spending review in June. That will be the moment of truth where he says, well, how much money is he really going to make ready for defence? And right now, words are very cheap in Europe, and we're giving lots of words, lots of, don't worry, we've got your back, Zelenskyy. And by the way, quite right too at this moment, it's important to do that. Now, it is bizarre thinking that Russia, a country whose economy is smaller than Italy's, is capable of terrifying the whole continent
Russia's
of Europe.
economy is smaller than Italy's.
It is, absolutely.
That's extraordinary.
It is. And yet, nonetheless, they've managed to create this military machine simply because they've run their economy on this kind of... It is a military-industrial complex in Russia. And by the way, that's another concern. Say there is peace. What's Putin going to do with this militaristic economy he's got? They'll have to go somewhere. So that's another concern that we've got. But still, Russia's projected this tiny, relatively small economy simply because we have not invested in our defence. We've got basically countries that are wide open to invasion, and they shouldn't be, but we've let it become that way. Now, if we wanted to repair that immediately, straight away, it would take years to rebuild. That's a process that's going to start. But I think the June spending review will be Keir Starmer's moment where he's saying, we've given the words, is he going to come up with the action? Is he going to do austerity for public services? Because that's what it would require. I mean, and that's very difficult politically.
Yeah, difficult for people like you as well, Rosie. What would you say?
We need to change the fiscal rules. He's said we're trying to get towards 3%. There's no other way around it politically at all. And we're very sentimental about our armed forces, rightly so. We need to show that they're not just old-fashioned, that they're properly equipped and that they're there and ready to fight if we need them to.
Lots to debate, certainly. Right, I feel like we need a little bit of lightness to end the programme because there's been an awful lot of serious news in the last few days. We have seen, of course, Keir Starmer standing tall on the world stage, as we've been discussing, as he would say, leading from the front, but his newfound diplomatic flex isn't down to the size of our military. After all, the UK has just 2 aircraft carriers currently in service. But the Prime Minister does have one not-so-secret weapon and is not afraid to use it. The Prime Minister, with a rare theatrical flourish, if you're wondering where I'm going here, he produced a letter from the monarch at the beginning of his meeting with Donald Trump in the Oval Office last Thursday.
So can I present the letter from the King to
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
Isn't that beautiful? He's a beautiful man, a wonderful man, and we appreciate it. I've known him, gotten to know him very well, actually. First term and now second term. Perhaps you'd like to say what that very important paragraph...
Yes, so this is a letter from His Majesty the King. It's an invitation for a second state visit. This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented.
And attempting to mop up the mess, shall we say, after that disastrous meeting between Donald Trump and President Zelenskyy, the King's soft power was deployed once again as he warmly welcomed President Zelenskyy at his Sandringham estate. The King was also fulfilling his role as Canadian head of state. He met with the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today. To be clear, Canada is still part of the Commonwealth, not the 51st state of the US, despite what President Trump may have said recently. Right, let's bring in Rosie and Fraser, shall we? Lots to discuss here, the kind of soft power of King Charles. But just on Canada, I wonder, how much consternation do you think there has been about the what he said about Canada?
It's just, you think you can't be shocked by things that Trump's going to say, and that's so hard to watch, that meeting between him and Starmer, because it was so cringeworthy. But he pulled out his letter about the King and it worked. It was Trump whispering at its best, wasn't it? But the Canada stuff, I mean, I think most of us surely don't take that too seriously, do we?